Thank you for all that very kind introduction, Sandy. Back at you, so, as Sandy mentioned, I create these fictional narratives in the form of, cinematic stage photographs. So this is one of the images from my most recent series that Sandy mentioned, in which I created or recreated, I should say, vignettes, from my childhood, growing up in the 1960s. And as Sandy mentioned, what makes my work a little bit unusual is that, like all of the sets, like this kitchen that you see here, it was a miniature diorama, that I built in my studio. Now, this has its advantages and disadvantages. The one advantage is it gives me like absolute control over everything. And the disadvantage is that it takes me forever. So for this project, it took really basically 5 years to create the 14 images in the series. And I really did my best to kind of, as authentically as I could, reconstruct the exact, several rooms of my childhood home, down to the models of the appliances and the exact upholstery patterns on our very ugly furniture. But I suppose the question is like, how did I get here? How did I end up with this kind of strange, convoluted style? And I suppose, the answer is a little bit complicated, but I think we kind of have to go back, to the beginning and kind of to really understand my evolution. So I grew up in a Bohemian family on a commune. Wait a minute, that's not my family. I didn't grow up in a commune. Yeah, that's my family. Okay, we were a little bit more conventional. So I grew up in this, middle class Jewish family, in the suburban Midwest, and there were absolutely no bohemians or artists or poets or writers or musicians, as far as I know, in any of my family, extended or not. Everyone in my family they were businessmen or lawyers or engineers. So I had in my family at least no role models. But I really did, as a kid, I loved art, and I was drawing from started drawing as early as I can remember. And while I didn't get much feedback at home, my kindergarten teacher did send home this note to my mom that was talking about my artwork and saying that someday she should enroll me at the art school at the Cleveland Museum and present this folder of Richard's drawings. Well, I actually didn't make it to arts, to the classes at the museum until I was in high school. And by that time, the kindergarten drawings were a little outdated, so I don't think I even showed them to them. But eventually I did make it to the museum school. But in terms of photography, my first really wonderful experience with photographs, it still influences my work, was looking at my family photo albums. And for me, this was just magical because it created this kind of wonderful connection and tension between both the strange and the familiar. And so there were these people that I knew, my parents, my grandparents, my great-grandparents, some of whom I knew, some I didn't. So I knew these people, but they were in these, old clothes in this other time that I had no idea was like. And I remember I was always asking my parents and my grandparents, what was it like in the olden days? So it was just this aura of the past that has always kind of fascinated me, especially, where people that I knew when they were back then, they were there. But eventually I did make it to art school at the University of Michigan, as Sandy mentioned. And this is where I kind of came under, the influence of these three artists, some of whom you may know, I guess you all know Edward Hopper. And here I kind of can't understate the importance of influences. I think it's really important to pay attention to those photographers or artists, that you're drawn to, because I think that's where you're going to find the seeds of what will eventually become your creative voice. And so these artists here, Jasper Johns is a very famous American painter. He's still alive. He's in his 90s now. but what drew me to his work were these wonderful textures. And he would paint these kind of commonplace objects like flags and targets and maps, but he would paint them in this with an encaustic, which some of you may know about because some photographers use it. It's like a wax-based paint. And he would get these absolutely wonderful textures. And despite this, he was considered a pop artist, painting these flags and things. But, when he spoke about his work, he said he was just trying to make the most beautiful image possible, when he went into the studio. And Joseph Cornell up on the right was an assemblage maker. He worked mostly in the 30s, 40s, and 50s, and some in the 60s, I guess. And he would he'd make these kind of these box-like assemblages with these kind of dreamlike poetic juxtapositions of found objects and images. And he would intentionally imbue his work with kind of aged-looking patinas, often by putting them in the oven to get them to age. And I was really drawn. One thing that I still love about his work is the intimate format of it. And then, of course, Edward Hopper, you probably know. And what really drew me to his work was his use of light and how he used it expressively to kind of, put emotion sort of into the picture. Oops. Now, while I was in art school, I didn't really do much photography in the darkroom myself. I took one darkroom class. I was really bad in the darkroom. But I was introduced to the works of these two contemporary photographers, Arthur Tress and Duane Michaels. And what really drew me to their work was that they didn't, rather than doing like traditional photographic genres of reportage or landscape or portraits, they did these kind of staged conceptual photographs with kind of dark symbolic content. And I just love the unsettling emotional narratives and the moods they evoked. And they're both older men now, but they're both still alive and still working. In fact, Duane Michaels actually taught a workshop last summer at Maine Media. And this is one of my favorite quotes from the musician Patti Smith, who said, "Seek out what magnifies your spirit." And I often put it as pay attention to what magnifies your spirit, because often you won't even be aware of it. And so anyway, after art school, I made my way to New York City from Michigan. This is a picture of me shortly after I arrived. I always say when I show this picture, we were so poor we couldn't afford walls on our apartment. But there I am as a young man and I do miss my hair very much. So when I arrived in New York, like all young artists, I had to find a way to support myself. And I found myself working as a day job in an architectural supply store. And so I found myself surrounded by all of these model building supplies like balsa wood and molding and things like that. And so I started making these box constructions, which were all influenced by, the painters that I showed you, an artist, Jasper Johns and Joseph Cornell and Edward Hopper. And I eventually moved on from this format to one that looked a little bit more camera-like, you might say. And so this is a little bit later, in the early 80s still. And so this is like made out of balsa wood, but it's painted with encaustic, which is the same paint that Jasper Johns used. And I just love the textures and the patinas that I could get with that. And you'll also notice that in this image, there's a little lens in the center. And inside that part, if you look in that lens, there was a little scene. And so in the scene, there was, like in this particular one, sometimes I would actually make figures out of clay. I don't have any pictures of those, but this was a little chair, that I made out of the wood from the architectural supply store. And I had a little night light, on the side that would actually light up the scene. So it was kind of like Joseph Cornell meets Edward Hopper inside an old camera made by Jasper Johns. And now that's sort of a joke, but I really think it's kind of how you combine your various influences where that's how you're going to kind of find, your own voice and your own creative vision. Around the same time, I kind of discovered the early history work, the early historical photographs of Eugene Doriot and Nadar, and there's sort of this kind of romantic eroticism from the 19th century, where they were really trying to sort of see what they could kind of painterly photographs they could make. But what I really loved about them was the sort of the dreamlike quality and also the kind of surface imperfections that just sort of, added to me just a whole nother layer of interest. And they were just sort of artifacts of the process. And I still love that about these vintage photographs. But this influence also eventually made its way, into the Hopper work. Now at this time, I moved on to painting. Fine art painting became very popular in the 1980s, and I eventually shifted from the box constructions to painting. And so this was one of the paintings that I made back then, and this was the oil painting. And I've always tended to work very slowly, and one reason I was drawn to oil painting was that it is a very slow medium, and I would kind of just paint and repaint over it, and sort of have these layers kind of build up, to kind of tell the story of the painting's creation. Okay. Now, I assume you've all heard of Photoshop. I did discover Photoshop. By about 1982 or 83, I had actually moved on from the art supply store and found that I could actually make more money as a graphic artist. And so I began working in the art department at HBO. And I worked there for many years as a day job. It was a terrific place to work. And while I was there, even before Photoshop came out, I kind of I found my influences really expanding to include both graphic design and contemporary photography, especially sort of this illustrative, conceptual photography. So, for instance, that Rent was the Rent poster for the play, rather, the famous Broadway play by New York. At the time, she lived in New York, a woman named Amy Gwip. And another photographer that I really loved is this photographer here. Name is Jeff Kern, who is out of Dallas, and they're both still around and working. But also I was influenced by graphic design and still vintage photography and painting. And the wonderful guy that ran the department in HBO was very forward thinking. And as soon as the Macintoshes came out in 1985, the department, was equipped with them. And at first we could really just use them to do very simple graphics and set, at the time, rudimentary type. But by 1990, Photoshop was introduced. And for me, that was, I can't kind of, it sounds like an exaggeration, but it really did change my life. And it was kind of, suddenly I kind of had a dark room that I could really relate to. And I found it to be much more intuitive than a traditional darkroom. And so I just started putting together a portfolio of my own images, kind of combining old paintings and found images and personal photographs that I had taken. And I began to market myself as a freelance photo illustrator. And it was a very good time to do that because there was the economy was very good. This was the early 1990s. The economy was good. There were big budgets and there were a lot of assignments. So this was the first really, really big job that I got. Some of you may recognize it if you've been around long enough. This was the packaging and this splash screen for the first version of Photoshop that had layers, a version 3.0. And I apologize for the quality of the image on the screen. I actually can't find a high-res version of it. I think all of my media that I back things up on have kind of died. So I don't even have a high-res version of this anymore. But this opened a lot of doors for me, and I was very busy, throughout the 90s making, doing kind of photo montages like this for annual reports and software packaging and magazines and book covers. What happened though was by around the year 2000, stock photography became very prevalent, and it basically took a lot of those high-paying corporate jobs away from us photographers and illustrators. But one area that was still hiring and still commissioning new photography was the publishing market for book covers. And I always loved the idea of doing book covers. I liked the idea of, I felt like it was a collaboration with the author. And so usually I would read the manuscript if I had the time and if they gave me the manuscript. But what the main thing that came out of this experience was that it forced me to really learn much more about photography, about the craft of photography, and about lighting and photographing people. So this particular one was an outtake from a photo session for a book cover. I also, because of my style, and this kind of goes back to my love of those old family photographs, I got almost all of the assignments that I got were period, historical fiction, or for images that, covers that had to do with either the Depression or sometimes the Civil War, or maybe it was, mental illness or things like that. And eventually, my dioramas kind of, made their way, back into my work. And I really just kind of, they kind of snuck back into the back door because I think I had an assignment where I just couldn't figure out any other way to do it than to build a diorama. Now, this particular image, it's actually one of my favorite images from that period. It was an illustration for a magazine story about the difficulties that returning veterans had in reintegrating with their families. So for me, introducing this diorama element into my work just really expanded the possibilities for storytelling. Now, up until this was, I think, around 2006 or something like that, I was still painting on the side. At this time, I had only been doing my photo montage work was only for commercial clients. But I really missed kind of being in the fine art world. And it dawned on me, and I had, a good friend tell me as well that what I was doing, with my photo montages was actually, more interesting than what I was doing with painting. So that's why I sometimes refer to myself as a failed painter. So I actually, around 2005 or 2006, I actually gave up painting and decided, to devote my kind of fine art work, towards fine art photography. And so the first thing that I did was I went to a portfolio review in New York, and I wanted to present my work to people that own galleries or directed galleries. And at the time, I had sort of these two different styles. On the style on the right was the style I used more for book covers, and that is actually a montage. So I'm still using my Photoshop skills. So basically, the young woman that I photographed there, I actually photographed her in Florida, where I was living for a little while. But then the background is actually a scene from Long Island. It was a beautiful foggy day, and so that was one thing that I love about having that skill sort of in my back pocket, is that it gives you so much flexibility in terms of the kinds of images that you can make. And the image on the left, that was actually an assignment for the New York Times about people that have actual nightmares about real estate transactions. So I had these, these two different kinds of images, going throughout my portfolio. And the feedback that I got from the gallerists was that you kind of need to pick one direction to go, and what you really need is a cohesive body of work of roughly 15 to 20 images that hold together as a series. And so I kind of had to figure out what I need to make a series. And I know that some of you are interested in the question of why do you even want to make a series. Now, this is a quote from a book that I have. It's called Authors of Photographers Sketchbooks. The title is kind of funny because there are very few sketches in the book. Most photographers' sketchbooks in the books are actually like bulletin boards with things. But anyway, you can see a project is a series of pictures in which a photographer takes on a theme, long game. And moments of shutter pressing become stepping stones to a much more ambitious and fulfilling expression. This is where serious photographers get serious. And so I think this, it seems to be true, not just for even fine art photographers, but a lot of photographers who are even more documentary photographers. They really want to tell a long-term story. And that seems to be, this is why I think so many people are attracted to series. And so I had to come up with an idea for a series. And that is when I actually came up with the idea for the Hopper series, which I call Hopper Meditation. So I actually started that, I think, in 2011. So it was not really that long ago, really. And I begin every project by just, doing research. And so I began to just kind of pore over all these Hopper paintings and trying to figure out which ones I might, be able to execute in my diorama style. And one reason I was attracted to Hopper was for all the reasons I mentioned before, things I liked about him, but also it seemed like especially his interior scenes were simple enough that I could pull it off, with my diorama skills. And as I said, research for me is a really important thing. And one thing that I'm always stressing to students is that, the first step of any creative project is to really immerse yourself in the subject matter. And so I also, studied the kind of the hairstyles from that period, from the 20s, 30s, 40s, and 50s. And I always kind of I'm very big on mood boards. And so I'm always, when I'm working on a project, any image that I come across that for whatever reason I find inspiring, if it in any way relates to the project, I'll take a picture with my phone or I'll download it and I'll just put it in a folder. And these are mostly a lot of the images which eventually became sort of the sources, for my storyboards for the Hopper project. And so after I did enough of this, I started choosing the paintings that I would first try to kind of re-execute in my style. And this was the first painting that really drew my attention. It's called Hotel by Railroad. And one reason that it really drew my attention was because the couple is actually older, and I think I was already in my early 50s, by the time I was doing this project. And so I could relate to it a lot. And also the interior is very simple. And so this was the first one that I tried to tackle. And so my first step was to start building the dioramas. And so I would draw a little plan in Adobe Illustrator, and then I would print it out and cut it out in cardboard. And so this is actually the scene out the window. So it's that building that if I go back, you can sort of see that building, and there are the railroad tracks. And so that's what I've done here. And then this was actually turned out to be the chair. So this was the very first diorama that I made. And so you can see that some of the dresser is actually a standard dollhouse dresser. One thing that's very convenient about working in that time period, 20s, 30s, and 40s, is that there's a lot of dollhouse furniture from roughly that time. And so at this point, I was actually just except for this chair I made myself because I couldn't find a dollhouse chair that looked that way. But I was, for most of my series, I worked in that standard dollhouse scale, which is basically, it's called 1/12 scale. So basically 1 inch equals 1 foot in real life. So an 8-foot ceiling would be 8 inches high. And you can see here, I didn't have any scene out the window. At this point, I was actually doing it. I was photographed it separately and then pasted in Photoshop. So this was the very first diorama that I did. And I'm not worried about the people yet. I just want to make the dioramas. And then I figured this would be my second image that I would try to make the diorama for. And this is, of course, maybe his most famous painting, called Morning Sun. I don't know if any of you had the opportunity to see that. Oh no, that wasn't in Baltimore, it's in New York. Sorry, the Hopper Show. But anyway, the Hopper Show, it was there. But so I figured I have to try to tackle this painting. And so this was my diorama for that. And you can see it's very, very simple and it's not perfect, but I didn't really worry about that because I figured I could fix that in Photoshop. And then for the scene out the window, I used this this is a model railroad building, but I did have to make the water tower, that would be on the roof. So after I had made the 2 or 3 or 4 of these dioramas, I figured it's time to start photographing the people. So I hired a model, a woman named Aria, and I hired a hairstylist, that's Fallon, on the left. And I made up a little storyboard of poses that I wanted Aria to execute, and she did. So this was from a little over 10 years ago. This was on May 1st, 2012, and I took about 400 pictures, that day. And those 400 pictures, along with the dioramas, gave me enough material for about 7 or 8 images. And so this was how that very first image turned out. And of course, that's me playing the male. I decided to play the male in all of the images because I work for cheap. And that's Aria on the left. Now, the scene that you see at the window in this image, I did that. I pasted it in Photoshop. Eventually, I got a little better, and I figured out how to do it in camera. But I think at this point, for most of the pictures of Aria, I was using continuous lighting. Since then, I've switched to strobes, but it made it a little bit more complicated, and it gave me a little bit less actual flexibility with the lighting. And this is how the second image came out, Morning Sun. And this is an image where I think if I had it to do over again, I would have tried harder to match the lighting that Hopper had, but I was pretty happy with that, as it turned out. And so at this point, I'm just going through his paintings and I'm trying to sort of recreate them, in my style as best I can without worrying about slavishly copying every detail. I'm really kind of just using it, using the paintings as a point of departure. But I was particularly proud of these windows, which I made, because you can't, the bed is a dollhouse bed, and some of the dollhouse furniture is absolutely just amazing. But you can't buy this kind of architectural stuff. You have to make it yourself because these windows are much bigger than the dollhouse windows. And I really wanted to try to replicate the windows in the painting. And this is another painting. I think this is called Summer in the City. And here you can see the influence of those kind of 19th century nudes that Nadar and the other guy was doing. Same bed, by the way. And this one was inspired by a painting, but really not really replicating it. Not long into the project, it occurred to me that I felt too restricted by just kind of copying his paintings, and I really just kind of used his paintings as inspiration. But one thing that I like about that diorama format, that it gives me an opportunity to kind of, have little inside jokes, like that's my parents, on the wall there. This was another one of Aria, and that's I love that, the bed. And again, I'm just trying to make, suggest little stories here. So I don't think there's no Hopper painting that looks really like this. But I just kind of put this, a book and these old letters there, just to kind of give it a little bit of resonance and to possibly imply some kind of story there. And the other thing that I like about Photoshop is that, her dress in this image was actually was a really dusty pink, a very pale pink. And it just didn't feel right. And I really wanted something that would sort of like a very warm color, that would play off the green in the background and kind of match the reds in these areas here. And so that's one of sort of, a very common color strategy, is to have a sort of a dominant overall tone and then have accents with the complementary color. And so I tend to do that quite a bit. Okay, this is not an actual image. Somebody actually thought this was a Hopper. And this is just my cat Smithers actually just crawled into the diorama. And you can see actually I had these little mannequins here. And that is, I use them as little stand-ins for the people so that I know how to light the actual models when I photograph the models. But Smithers had always wanted a room of his own, and he finally got it. So and this was a photograph of an antique French dollhouse, that I just came across. I don't remember, it was on the internet somewhere or on Pinterest. And I love the sort of the patina in the walls and the color schemes. And this really kind of inspired the next diorama that I did, which I call this, the pink bedroom diorama. And I did I think about 5 images just using this diorama by having different points of view. And I moved the furniture around as I needed to. But I can tell you some of my I don't have any real secrets. I'm kind of very open about it. But for instance, the rug, all the rugs, that's just a printout of a rug printed out of my inkjet printer on matte paper and then cut out. And again, there's a dollhouse dresser. I think the curtains are actually paper towels that I've soaked in acrylic and painted. And the sheets, the problem with dollhouse sheets is they don't look very realistic because they're much too stiff. And so to get the details that I really want, I figured out years ago when I was doing back in the 80s, how to make these more realistic sheets out of tissue paper. And you just kind of soak them in acrylic. And then you can get all of these really fine wrinkles, and it's much more convincing than using whole cloth. So in the first year, I think I did about 8 or 9 images. You didn't see all of them, but and then about a year after I photographed Aria, I photographed the second model. There are 2 models in the whole series. Aria was the first model, and this is Ariel, who's the second model. And I know one common question I get is, where do you find your models? And both Aria and Ariel, I found on a model website called Model Mayhem. And I still use it and often find models there. And that's actually the same hairdresser, Fallon, who I think I also found Fallon on Model Mayhem. She changed her hair here. And you can see that she's doing, Ariel's hair. And Ariel had this really wonderful red hair and pale skin. And she was really terrific for this series. And so this is one of the first photographs that I took of her. So I took, again, I photographed her for one day. And I think I took about 400 photographs of Ariel that day. And I don't know if any of you are familiar with lighting or strobe lighting, but I love, once I discovered strobe lighting, it kind of, again, one of those things that kind of changed my life and my workflow. And I became, it gave me much more flexibility in terms of the strength of the lights. and getting the shadows and the kind of hard lighting that I was looking for, which was more what Hopper used, what Hopper had. And so this, but you can do it very simply. This is just really one light, one speed light shot into a silver umbrella, about 10 feet away down a hallway to the right. And then there's a little reflected light off the wall here to kind of a little bit of fill, on her back. And then I had to, kind of light the diorama. And this is how the finished piece came out. And I discovered when I was photographing the diorama that in order to make it look light outside, by this time this is not pasted in Photoshop. This was all done on camera. It occurred to me that, well, I discovered that I had to actually light up the ambient light outside in order to look like daytime. And if I didn't, then it looked like this. It looked like nighttime. So I made two different images, one at day and one at night. And I also, you can say, I put another speed light, in this window, and I gave it a warm gel to make it look like an incandescent light. And so it's the same, basically the same room, the same model, and almost really the same lighting, but different times of day. This is maybe my favorite image from the whole series, and it was really based on this painting by Haber. And I followed it pretty faithfully, but again, not slavishly. The chair is different, and I just learned to live with that. And I had done an image of this diorama with area originally, but there was something about it that I just wasn't happy with, and I thought I would try it again with Ariel. And it just worked out really well with Ariel, just with her kind of soft body type and that terrific red hair. It was really a stronger image. And this one was really inspired by the old master paintings of the reclining nudes, odalisques that, like if you go back to Ang or Rubens or Giorgione even, but I kind of updated it. And this was, I think I can say pretty unequivocally, this is probably the most popular image in the series. I think I've sold more prints of this than any other image. In this one, I remember I had started releasing these and showing these on the internet, and up until I got criticized by a woman who was wondered why only the females were nude and not the males. And so I thought, well, she has a point. So I figured so that's me. And I had to, in the pictures with Ariel, I had to kind of turn my hair brown in Photoshop because honestly, I'm really way too old for Ariel, and I didn't want it to look creepy. So I aged myself backwards. And this was the last image of the series, and it's the only image that has 3 people in it, and the only image with a child. The child was really an afterthought. I just had a photograph of this child that I had taken for a book cover assignment, and I was just wondering what would it look like if there were a child in the picture. And kind of to my surprise, well, not so much to my surprise, but it really changed the dynamic because suddenly instead of a couple, you had a family. And this was also something that was going to influence some of my future projects as well. And in terms of how I build the stories, sometimes I have the stories in my head, or in the poses and the choreography in my head, and other times it just sort of is more spontaneous. So this was really just inspired by a pose that Ariel made, and when she posed, there was no magazine there. She was just lying on a mattress with nothing there, but it looked to me like she was reading a magazine. She should be reading a magazine. So I put the magazine there, and it's actually, if you were to kind of zoom in and look at it, it's actually a magazine, a spread from a 1940s or 50s movie magazine. So that I wanted, I do want the detail to sort of be, authentic. And so that was the last of the Hopper images. So this is the entire series, if you were kind of going to go through it. And so there were mostly about half of them with the first model, Aria, and then about the other half with the second model, Ariel. And so when people ask me, how long it took to do the project, I basically say, well, it was like 2 days of photographing the models and 2 years for everything else. And this is a scene from Krakow, Poland. And in 2010, I visited Krakow with my wife, sadly, my late wife, Eva. That's Eva there. And Eva had grown up in Krakow. And so that was our first visit there in 2010. And the first time she'd been back in 30 years. And I was just kind of awestruck by the architecture there and the sense of history, because not only was Eva, born and raised there, but my family, my Eastern Jewish European family, was also from not Krakow but nearby. And so now I did this in this was from 2010, and I didn't really know how it would find its way into my work. But while I was working on the Hopper series, I came up with the idea for my next series, which was I call Once Upon a Time in Kazimierz. Now, Kazimierz is the historically Jewish neighborhood of Krakow. And so I came up with this idea about a novella sort of told in photographs. And so it's about a Jewish family living in Kazimierz in the year 1930. And I wanted to make it 1930 because I wanted to have sort of a dark undertone to it and sort of a sense of foreboding, but I didn't want to have like Nazis or anything like that in it. So it is really and so this is the fictional family, that I made up. And this particular piece was a family portrait that I made and a montage of the actors that the models that I hired for the series. And basically, so it portrays an episode in the life of this fictional family, and it basically involves the theme of grief. And it's really kind of a tragic series that basically the son here dies really before the series starts. And so he only appears as in flashbacks. And this basic theme of the story is about how this couple's grief kind of wreaks havoc in their marriage. And so these are the two opening images. And so you can see they're very much influenced by, Vermeer, and probably still Hopper. But again, I've kind of made this, I've had sort of fun making this, this diorama, and I'm getting a little more ambitious, in my diorama making. And so this is the scene of the family eating their kind of simple supper together. And this was at the time probably one of the more complicated images that I had done. Everything is miniature in this photograph, except for the people and the food. I couldn't get the food right if it were miniature, so I had to do the food full size. And that this image was, kind of directly inspired by Vincent van Gogh's painting, which is called Potato Eaters, the Potato Eaters, and I gave my image the same name. And this is a scene where supposedly the son comes to visit the mother in a dream. And I wanted this kind of nighttime scene with this sort of, I guess either there's street light or moonlight shining in, and this curtain sort of blowing, in the breeze. And the son is kind of reaching out, to his mom. And this particular image was really inspired by these two works. One is the top is an etching by Edward Hopper, and the bottom is a photograph by Emmett Gowan, who photographs his wife extensively. I guess mostly back in the 70s, 60s, 70s. And I love both of those images. And so I've always kind of, I could probably say stealing, but inspired by these other works of art is probably the main way that I make my images. This is a picture, sort of a portrait, of the grieving mother, Zoe. And Zoe, by the way, is I also found on that same website, Model Mayhem, and I've worked with her a few times since then as well. And then I sort of made, this is a picture of the son that I sort of made that just for the project as a prop. And this is another image. So basically what happens in the plot is that the wife kind of becomes distraught, and she ends up having, an affair with one of the husband is a tailor, and she works with him, and she ends up having an affair with a customer. But I wanted to kind of try to see if I could sort of make almost like a street photograph, like a stage street photograph. And so that's sort of my attempt. This is my attempt, at that. And by the way, that's actually me. I kind of give myself a little cameo in every series somewhere. And so I can also say that, by the way, the most labor-intensive part of this whole project was probably making these cobblestones, which are actually sheets of little pieces of foam core that I crushed while I was watching TV late at night and then painted. And to sort of a little behind the scenes, this is sort of the diorama. And so to get the sense of atmosphere, I used a fog machine. Now, because this is like a deeper space than most of my other dioramas, I used a smaller scale. So that's why this mannequin appears so big. So in order to get I had to kind of cobble together these very rough mannequins to get to light the figures the way I wanted to have them lit. And then this is another, these buildings that I made. And you can kind of see, though, how I use my painting skills. And that's one of my favorite things to do in the dioramas is actually, painting the walls and the building, because it kind of, lets me get my painting bug out. And so these are two more images from that same series. This one on the left is the couple, and this is kind of, I guess this is sort of the crux of the problem, where basically the husband kind of retreats into his, religious traditions. That's how he copes with the loss. But, for his wife, that doesn't really quite work, and she's just kind of, distraught. And this is sort of this kind of seedy hallway where the wife goes to have this rendezvous with this stranger. And I also, one thing that I really like to do in terms of the narratives is, like, I didn't really want to show the couple kind of actually having, in any kind of embrace or something like that. I really liked showing the before and the after, and having the viewer kind of fill in the missing parts. And this particular image, you can see that it was really inspired by the photographer Bill Brandt. I kind of just combined those two images and Bill Brandt is, he's one of my favorite photographers. So I don't feel bad about stealing from him, whenever I can. Oh, by the way, I also play the creepy guy. So I made myself the villain. And this is one of the last images, in the series. And this is a quote by the short story writer, Grace Paley. And I'd like to think, even though I have my own ideas of how the story ended, I'd like to kind of think of it as open-ended. And the question is, did the couple stay together or not? And so and so I really love that quote by Grace Paley that every character deserves an open destiny. So you can see there's the couple in the street, and then that's like the mother-in-law in the window there. And so this is the whole series. If I would put them out, end to end. So basically, it lays out, just the couple, and then this is them kind of working in their apartment, having dinner, and then this is another flashback of the son, and you can see how it follows all the way through. I just need a drink. So while I was working on this one, somehow I got the idea of doing the series about my childhood. And so I called this My Childhood Reassembled, and I did this from 2016 to 2021. And I suppose in a way that, each of my series, of these three series, has become kind of progressively more personal, and at the same time sold less well. So I don't know if there's a lesson in that. But I probably feel closest to this series because it was the last series that I did, and it also is just incredibly personal. And so I grew up in this very ugly house in suburban Cleveland. And this is the bottom picture here is that as the house looks now. It actually looks much better now than it did when I lived there. And that's my brother with our dog, and I'm with the baseball cap. That's my cousin, actually. But that's the front door. And on the right is my kind of recreation of that. And I only needed the exterior for one picture in the series, but somehow it was really important for me to build it. So I've kind of done my best to recreate it, as faithfully as possible. And I only made one window, so I had to use it for both the top and the bottom window. So that's why you can actually see through into the living room there. And one thing I would love, like, getting the details right. So for instance, that's like we had the really ugly furniture. I don't know why. And that was I actually made that fabric, that upholstery pattern in Photoshop, and then printed it out and actually pasted it onto the furniture, which I made out of 1/2-inch insulation foam. Then the table and the TV, I made out of balsa wood, actually. And to light the TV, I wanted to have the TV look as real as possible. And that's actually the model, the TV that we had. And so when I would photograph this, again, all the light is artificial coming in. I had a little light inside the TV to sort of emit light, so that it looked more realistic. And again, I even like the detail, it's like what's that saying by Mies van der Rohe, God is in the details. So even like this cigarette pack is like a Lucky Strike, which when I was little, my mom smoked Lucky Strikes. And I remember that pack. And so I had to actually recreate a soft pack for the model to hold. And I really wanted the models, at least especially my parents, to kind of resemble my actual parents. And so this woman actually was an Instagram follower of mine. That's how I found her. And she agreed to pose as my mom. But it took me about 2 years to find the right woman to play my mother that I felt comfortable with playing my mom. And so most of the scenes are actually memories, that I recreated. Now, this is one scene that actually I don't really ever remember my mother taking naps. But we did play dress up a lot. We had a lot of old clothes in our basement, and we would kind of raid our parents' closets. And this, with the little girl is wearing, that actually was my grandmother's mink stole that the little girl is wearing there. And these were scenes that I do remember. I did love music, and I loved kind of playing guitar. I had a little toy guitar. and playing it along with our 45 records. My dad actually was in the radio business, and so he would bring home records all the time, and so we had a ton of 45 records. And I especially love the Everly Brothers, and also Chubby Checker and the Kingston Trio, if you remember any of those groups. And I would play along, and that's my mother would basically be around there drinking coffee all the time. And this was our kitchen, and the kitchen I had to really make kind of from memory, because I didn't really have any pictures of it. I definitely remember the linoleum floor. And I also remember, this picture is really about the kind of the mystery of my parents' marriage. I remember, my dad would work late often, and my mom, didn't work. She was a housewife. And I would be in bed and I would hear my dad come home. My mom would still be, cleaning up from dinner, and they would be speaking in hushed tones. And I always wondered what they were talking about. The only time I would actually come out though is sometimes, well, on a weekend they would order pizza and then we would smell the pizza. Then they'd have to share the pizza. But this was as faithfully as I could recreate our living room as possible. And one of the things that was pointed out to me about the series, and it wasn't a topic that I set out, to kind of, I wasn't trying to inject social commentary into it. It just happened because it was there, because it was lived. And so we had like a lot of middle-class Jewish families, and we had a Black housekeeper, Carrie. And Carrie was from a very poor section of town, but which I think I knew. But basically she, to me, she was just, part of our family, and I remember when I was telling my wife about, including, Carrie, in the series, or a person playing Carrie. And by the way, this is actually, the model is actually Fallon, who's the hairstylist. She agreed to play Carrie for this scene, for this. My wife was concerned that I would get a lot of flack, for including such a, kind of a stereotype. But Carrie was such an important part of my childhood that I felt, leaving her out, would have been inauthentic. And I just wanted it to be authentic. And Carrie, her private life was basically, pretty much unknown to us, except I knew that she wasn't married. And I knew that she had children. But the idea that she, how hard her life was, I didn't have really such an inkling of, as a child, but it was something that I wondered about. And that, she must have, I can't even imagine the kind of stress that, she must have been under. And of course, she lived in another part of town. She didn't have a car. She would take the bus, to our house. But she came every day, and my brother and sister and I spent a lot of time with her, and she would travel with us, on trips to visit relatives and things like that. And she would always, take her Bible with her. And so that's kind of what this picture is about. And this is a picture of, inspired by these, family dinners we would have, where basically my grandparents and my great aunts and uncles would come over for dinner fairly often. And they would end up in these kind of much more buoyant scenes, raucous, buoyant scenes, kind of reminiscing and telling jokes. And at dessert, of course, it ended up being a very much of a smoke-filled room, because back then everybody smoked. And again, some of the social commentary that I can't avoid is that, my mom, for the most part, didn't really sit down much. She was serving. But that was the way it was. And I, after I showed the series to a cousin of mine, after I finished it, and he said, I never realized that your mom was so depressed. But the truth is, I do think she was depressed. My parents had a very traditional marriage. My father, was the breadwinner. My mother stayed home, and she was a very bright, woman who had a lot of interest. And it wasn't really until after we left home, and even after my dad, sadly passed away very young, that she kind of blossomed, into her own person. And this is one of my favorite quotes by the poet and author Mary Oliver, is that we don't put the truth in our work, we find it in the process of making the work. And what I love about that quote is that how important the process is, and that often we find inspiration in the process of doing the work. And this is, I think, almost the last image in the series. And again, it's about the kind of mysteries of my parents' marriage and the silence around emotional issues that kind of was omnipresent in our house. And maybe that's one of the reasons why my work tends to be so melancholy. And I was kind of a melancholy kid, despite my having very loving parents, but that, we did not know how to talk about emotional issues or anything really, really important to each other, in the house. And so that's really what this picture is about. And I just had to get in those old test patterns. If any of you are, old enough to remember, back in the 60s, the television stations were only on, up until I think 10 or 11 o'clock at night, or maybe midnight, I don't remember. And then you would just get a test pattern. And so I felt like I had to include that. And again, that's actually me and my sister and brother, in our school pictures from back in those days. And so if you put the series, end to end, this is the series that looks like. And they're all on my website, if you want to get a closer look at them. Okay, so one other question that I'm always asked, is what I'm working on now. And so now I have to, give you a warning, this gets a little heavy. So I'm working on a series now about my late wife. This is my late wife, Eva, who, the one who was born and raised in Krakow. And in June of 2019, she was in a very bad bout of depression, and she took her own life. And so now I'm working on a series about that. And this is a picture that I took of her the day before she died. She just kind of stepped into, we were having dinner at a friend's house, and she just stepped into the light. And it was just such a, I'm not this kind of a photographer, but this is the one picture that I took, what they call the decisive moment, I suppose. I'm really not the kind of photographer, but this is the one picture that I got that I'm just so glad that I got. So I've been working on this series now. It's really about love and death. But that's really what I love about photography, is that you can really find, it's such a great way to tell your own story and to process your own story and your own emotions. And it's the one thing that's, I'm probably not the first artist to say it, but it's the one thing that's kind of never really let me down, And so this has been a really difficult project to work on, as you might imagine. But I'm getting there, and it's quite different from the other work. And this is another quote by a novelist, Sue Monk Kidd. And if any of you read The Secret Life of Bees, it's a terrific novel. And it's just that the deeper we go into our own personal journey, the more likely we are to hit the universal. Okay, now I'm almost done, but just before I stop, I just want a brief word, from our sponsors, me. I am teaching 2 workshops in August in Maine. There are still spaces available. One is called Staging the Cinematic Photograph, and the other is on Photoshop, the art and craft of Photoshop. So in Staging the Cinematic Photograph, basically we go around to different places, different locations, sometimes in the studio, and we kind of make up our own stories. So we shoot models, and it's really a lot of fun. So these are two images from that course. And this was actually from the Photoshop course. A woman, Callie McCaw, did this image. And so if you're interested, Sandy is going to paste the links to more info about this. Also, it's on my website. I also would love it if you would subscribe to my newsletter. I talk about whatever exhibitions, new work, workshops, online classes, and I also have something I just call the Creative Conversation. So I just did a one issue about AI, and so I took, this is one of my, from the Polish series, and I replaced it with an elephant. Of course, if you'll notice, the elephant actually has 5 legs in it, but so it's called, I think I call it the the 5-legged mammal in the room. So there's Sandy's going to put a link if you want to subscribe to this. And I also have a video course, a Photoshop video course. And if any of you are interested in that, I'm happy to offer you a 15% discount off the sale price. And you can just use the discount code Baltimore. And Sandy will put a link in the chat for that. And it's also on my website. And thank you so much for bearing with me. And that's the end. All right, I'm going to stop my share.
Good. Hang on. Great. Richard, thank you. You certainly lived up to what all your students were saying when I was at Maine Media. So thank you. I have put in the chat the newsletter sign up and the video course where we get a discount. So that's in the chat room. I will also send out all of this when I send out a copy of the video, and including the Maine Media Workshop. So thank you. Now questions, and I want everybody just to, open up, turn on your video, audio, and ask away. We do have a couple of questions in the chat room, and Phyllis Berger, are you still here? You want to ask, Richard? Hi.
Hi. Number one, I'm a huge fan.
Oh, thank you.
I teach photography. I show your work every year, and students always love it. And they're very inspired by what you do. So it's just amazing to have a chance to talk to you.
Oh, thank you.
So I love your use of depth of field. And I was just wondering, do you selectively do that in post, or how much of it is in the camera?
It's all in the dioramas, it's all in the camera.
Wow.
And then, but I always photograph the figures sharp, and then I will blur them in post to match the depth of field in the image, in the camera, in the diorama image.
Okay, wow. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Can I also ask one more question, just real quick?
Yeah.
About the Maine Media Workshop. So for the Photoshop class, like I teach Photoshop, but I feel like I can still learn a lot more. What is the skill level of the students in the class?
Supposedly, it's listed as intermediate to advanced.
That's pretty.
So I would say that's should be pretty accurate. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Oh, that's great. Okay. Thank you.
Sure.
Yeah, Richard, I had a question for you.
Sure.
I noticed that, in your talk, you said that you do a lot of creating of the models, and I guess probably a lot of merging of images.
Mm-hmm.
What do you feel with the new AI coming about, where you can probably create a lot of that more in AI? You think that would make your work easier to do?
Well, yeah, I suppose it would make it easier. I mean, at the moment, my personal decision is to not use it because it's just something. It's just a bridge too far for me right now.
I was thinking more of like maybe creating the furniture. Maybe creating the furniture.
part of it is that what I love about making the furniture and the dioramas that it gets me off the computer. And I'm kind of not looking for more reasons to sit in front of the computer that I already have. And I really love the tactile part of making that stuff myself.
Okay.
I do use like to make the furniture, I did use like a laser cutter for my last project. That made my job much easier. But I feel much, like somebody asked me the other day about one of the childhood images, and they said, is there AI in that? And for whatever reason, I found it incredibly gratifying to say, no, there's no AI in it. So I have a lot of friends who are using AI in the work, but my personal choice for now is to not use it.
Okay. Yeah, because I heard you say that sometimes it takes you a long while to put the set together.
It does.
And I
It
know
does.
like with the new AI, it's like if you wanted like a miniature table, you could probably get that.
Well, you could, I mean, I suppose if I were, I mean, there was a time where I was interested in 3D rendering, as well. And, you could do that too, but there was something about, I first of all, it's like, there's something about the real world stuff that I just really, the tactile world that I'm kind of clinging to, I suppose.
Okay. Well,
So,
I can appreciate that.
yeah, I think also, I think for me, the amount of time that it takes me is also almost more of a feature than a bug,
Okay.
because there are just like what every day, like 1 billion images are uploaded to the internet, so it's like I work at a slow, I'm okay with having a smaller output.
Okay. Okay. Well, thanks for the comments.
You're welcome.
Oh,
Thank
actually, not the comments, but the information.
you. Oh, you're welcome.
So any other questions?
Hi, this is Suku.
Oh, yeah.
Hi, Richard. Lovely
Hi.
presentation.
Thank you.
Love it, love it. I think I don't have the time to do all that what you're doing.
I'm a
But
glutton for
I
punishment.
enjoyed the way how you created the images. And so there are a couple of questions here. Do you store all these models with you somewhere, and do you recycle through them, change the paint and all that?
I had this idea to recycle them occasionally. I mean, okay, I did recycle one thing for this project I'm working on now. For the most part, I save as many as I can. I just don't have the room to save all of them.
Okay.
So some of them I had to get rid of, but I think the furniture I always save,
Okay.
I can save. So
Okay. The other question is, when you said this is the most popular print, do people tend to buy the whole volume or just one print in particular?
I don't know anyone who's bought the whole, like the whole series. But some people have bought more than one, but usually it's maybe, I think it was one collector who always buys 4 prints, 4 different images, but
Okay.
usually it's one at a time,
Okay. I know.
but the more the better,
Yeah, the more the better to tell the story, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And have you reached the universal?
The studio?
No, the quote you liked.
Wait, I didn't.
About the bees. I forgot the secret lives of
Oh, yeah.
the
Well, that's a good question, actually. That's always my aim to reach the universal, though, when it's trying to sell the prints from the childhood series, though, a lot of people said, oh, it's too personal for
Yeah.
me. So, in that case, I probably missed, I guess, but I don't know. I guess my question is, well, didn't you have a childhood, but
Yeah.
but
All
anyway,
right.
yeah.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for
Enjoyed
the
it.
questions.
Yep.
I have a question, and I came in I came in a little late, unfortunately, and you may have answered this at the beginning, but first of all, it's about the furniture. How large is each piece?
So each piece roughly translates like 1/12 of real life scale. So basically 1 foot in real life equals 1 inch
Uh-huh.
in the, but actually the sort of, it reminds me of a funny story because when I was building the furniture, recreating the furniture from my childhood, there was an end table that I had I guess I had just kind of recreated from memory, you know. And then it turned out that my sister actually had that in her basement. And so I didn't find it in the basement until after I'd already built the little model, but I had made the model way too big, you know, for this, the actual table was much smaller. And it was the table that the record player was on. So I spent a lot of time at that table. But in my childhood mind, it was a much bigger table, you know.
Yeah.
Of course. Well, I asked the question about the furniture, and I can, and also your answer about AI. To me, it's horrifying, and it would take away the real creativity and honesty of someone's art. I made my daughter a doll house when she was 6 years old,
Mm.
and I used a huge packing crate for the wood. And I had so much fun making it, and I was so proud of it, and all the little things that went in it. And even the family, the mother, father, you know, it's all handmade. And that dollhouse is in my house right now upstairs. And we're going to pack it off and send it to my granddaughter this year.
Oh, terrific.
So
If,
I mean,
yeah,
it's just a joy to be able to make it with your own hands,
yeah,
these
absolutely.
things.
If you, it's funny, you know, if you're ever in New York and you're interested in dollhouse stuff, there's a little store on the Upper East Side called Tiny Dollhouse. And I go there, you know, fairly frequently. And I'm almost always the only male in there. You know, it's almost all either mothers and daughters or grandmothers and granddaughters. You know? But it's a terrific store if you're ever in New York. Yeah.
Thank you. Well, I absolutely loved your presentation. I
Oh,
have to
thank
say
you.
it's probably going to be one of my most favorite that we've ever had.
Oh,
Thank you.
thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Kay. Other questions? Sandy, I noticed you had a question in the chat.
Mhm.
Yeah,
I ditto that. That was a great presentation. I
you.
appreciate you sharing about yourself too as you were sharing the presentation. One of my favorite pictures that you showed was the one in Poland, the street and the homes on the side of the street.
Mhm.
And I was trying to figure out where was the focus point. Like when I take a picture, there's that little red dot that
Mhm.
you know you focus in on, and I don't know if in that particular picture, if you made the aperture really high, then that focal point didn't matter. But is
Is
that
it the one with the couple in the street, that one, or?
it was the very first picture very first slide when you started talking about Poland. I think it did have the couple in the street, and the street kind of
It was in Krakow.
yes,
The actual photo in Krakow.
yeah.
Oh, oh, that was just a cell phone picture. I think.
Oh, that
No,
was just a cell phone.
no, it wasn't
Okay.
a cell phone picture. That was, I think I actually had it was a DSLR. But that was just taken with I think it was a 30mm lens on a, no, I take that back. Was it 30? It was a DSLR. I don't remember what the lens was, but it was just like, it wasn't autofocus, but it was daylight, you know. Yeah.
Okay. It was still great. It was a great picture, and like even with the tops of the roof was cut off kind of on some of them, and that didn't
Uh-huh.
seem to matter. It
Yeah.
just
Oh,
was
yeah.
centered perfectly. And so, yeah, that was the one question. I also was wondering, on one of your dioramas, you had the window and you had lighting come through the window, and you had asked, or you had said that you use continuous lighting on this and not strobe lighting. And I'm just a little not familiar with what that actually means, because when I think of strobe lighting, I think of that bright flashing white light. So if you could tell me what.
Yeah, no, that's exactly. Strobe is a flash,
Yeah.
and continuous is basically, it's not a flash. It's just, you turn it on and it's on. Like,
Okay. So sometimes you use, for when you use strobe lighting, you're just like making the light flash at the same time the camera's
Right,
flashing.
right.
Okay. So in that particular one, you're using continuous lighting.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah. Continuous lighting, of course, is what they use for cinematography, because they can't use but the flash is much more powerful, because it's only on for a split second, so you can control the
Great.
amount
Okay.
of
Yeah.
light. Yeah,
Makes complete sense. So yeah. Thank you.
you're welcome.
Well, I can't believe I'm the one to ask this question, because it's usually not what I'm interested in. But but the equipment that you're using, your camera, how you're set up when you are photographing the models, and
I'm still using a DSLR. It's a Canon. It's 5D S or R. It's has more resolution than the normal 5D. But I use basically, I think when I'm photographing the diorama, I'll use a little wider angle than when I'm photographing the models, just so that the perspective matches more. But that's, yeah, that's pretty much it. So just that, I mean, my equipment's very run of the mill, it's
Okay.
nothing, it's really nothing fancy. Yeah.
okay. Anybody else? Any other questions? No? Okay. Well, Richard, I just want to say, as I said in the introduction, it was so nice meeting you at Maine Media. And actually I'm going up there this week, and it's going to rain all
terrific.
week.
Oh,
I know. And so we'll,
Beautiful today.
I'm sorry, what, Bill?
Beautiful today.
Oh, yes. And anyway, so I just so appreciate you speaking to us tonight, sharing your work. But as Sandy said, and it's what I was thinking as well, is how much you bring yourself into it, how much you reveal of your process and yourself in that. So it just made for a really compelling story for me.
oh, thank you.
So,
Thank you, Sam.
yes,
It was a
thank you.
pleasure. Yeah.
Great.
Very interesting.
Yes.
Thank you all for
Yeah,
watching,
thank you.
listening. Okay.
Thank you. All right, everybody. Thank you for joining us.
Yes,
Have a
thank
good
you.
night.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you. Yes.
Okay. Thank you
Good
all.
night.
Okay. Have a good
Richard.
night.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Oh, video.